Welcome. So we are about to tackle the hottest of hot topics at GraphQL Conf this year. And we have some amazing panelists. Come on, guys. Let's have a seat. So we have Boris Besemer here, Senior Platform Architect at Vercel, where he works closely with some of their most strategic and high-growth customers to help them push the boundaries of what's possible on the platform. But really, what he's most known for, in my opinion, he made the very first GraphQL MCP server, MCP GraphQL, and open sourced it. We're super excited to have you here, Boris. And we have Fredrik Björk. So Fredrik is the founder and the CEO of GraphPace, the API platform for mission-critical applications, and previously CTO of The RealReal, leading that company through its IPO. And super excited to have you, Fredrik. Thank you for being here. And then Kewei, Senior Staff Engineer at Meta, maintaining the GraphQL framework, and also member of our very own GraphQL Technical Steering Committee. And her team supports the Meta AI app, and also part of the organization that's taking the lead on AI for productivity within Meta. So super excited that you could join us. And we have Michael Watson. You might have seen him just a moment ago giving an awesome talk. And so Michael, lead DevRel at Apollo, and MCP AI guru he was early on this stuff and now deep, I believe, organizing something on Thursday locally. Is that right? Thursday. Awesome. And so thank you all for joining us here. Now, notice up there a QR code. And so we want to hear your questions. So go ahead and scan that right now. If you have any questions that you would like us to address. And also give some thumbs up or thumbs down on questions you see there so that we can talk about some great stuff here. And so to kick us off, Fredrik, is AI going to take all our jobs?
Eventually, yes, but not tomorrow. That's my take. I mean, if you look at the rate of progress in AI, just think, a year ago, MCP didn't exist. Anthropic was founded 2021. What would the world look like in 2 years, in 10 years, 20 years? I mean, I don't think we're going to be using low bandwidth keyboards to code things anymore. I think you'll probably use audio, your mind, to project what you want. And yeah, unfortunately, the golden age of coding might not be here anymore, unfortunately. So I guess my recommendation is, find a hobby. Start painting, because you will be contributing. You won't have a job to society. That's my prediction.
All right. Anyone else? Agree, disagree? Go ahead, get your very own.
Maybe a slightly more optimistic take, or maybe I have a big company problem. So from my personal experience, I would say maybe only 20 to 30% of my time as a developer is to actually write code. Most of the time, I solve problems with other people. Either it's a PM, our designer, or just other engineers. We have conflicts, we disagree. We need to find ways to agree with each other and align with our roadmaps and solutions. I feel like we have a very clear path for how AI is going to improve our productivity in code. But a lot of times it's not there yet for helping solving a lot of these people-related problems or planning strategy-related problems. So I think it's going to freeing us. It's going to be a productivity boost. Until it somehow figures out how to solve that difficult problem, I don't think it's going to replace us anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty optimistic viewpoint on that. I don't think it's replacing jobs for us in the sense of, what we do day to day. I think it's going to be changing a lot of how we do our jobs day to day. One of the companies I always like to call an example from is Block. Block created Goose. It's an open source agent. But the really interesting thing, Jack Dorsey mandated everyone in the company uses Goose. And what's kind of come out of that is they have like 70 plus internal MCP servers that basically are just purpose-built tools for a department. Like my friend that works at the company, he works on the legal counsel, and they essentially have some tools now that do things like case summaries, right? Something that, you know, a first or second year college graduate would be, you know, summarizing cases of research. LLM's pretty good at that if you're having the process outlined from a senior legal counsel standpoint. So I think there's going to be a lot of that, and there will be jobs lost in that, but I think it gives us all an opportunity to do a lot more with what's there.
So it's a bit double. During the daytime, you'll have like 3 or 4 cloud agents running at the same time. You're on an all-time high, you're committing code, you're being happy, and then during the evening you go to X or something else, and you get this take like, hey, your job is cooked, it's over. Your job's going to get taken. It's such a like low, high, constantly with whatever model. But I think in general, we need more software, we need better software, and you're definitely noticing like, hey, this deep technical knowledge that you've gathered over the years, like working with other people, having more context on the issue, or in general, it just really helps you be more productive. It's more like an amplification currently, and I don't know how it's going to be in 20 years. We'll be painting most likely, but for now, it feels like you should just ignore like the negative takes, but be serious about what it could do for your job as well, and then try to use it as a tool to get better results.
So I heard MCP mentioned, and so let's talk about that elephant in the room. So MCP, Model Context Protocol, was I think it came up in a hackathon like almost a year ago internally at Anthropic and brought to the world just last November, and then now it's been exploding. So what is the relationship with GraphQL? Does MCP replace GraphQL? Is GraphQL make MCP redundant? Thoughts? Who's first?
I feel like people are looking over at me.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think they're very complementary. One of the things that I think people in the MCP space started to quickly realize is, everyone kind of started having this like, oh, I take my open API spec and I just get all the tools for all the endpoints in there. And really what that ends up doing is you're using the context window for your agent to figure out which order things should be called in. In my talk just previously, I talked about the dream query, what we would typically do for like a client application. Like, what's the ideal query for that UI of what you're doing? It's the same thing for MCP. What's the tool context you're trying to provide to the LM? That should be the shape of like the GraphQL operation. I found just when you use like REST and everything, you end up just really polluting the context window, and it leads to higher hallucination rates down the stream. So I like the standardization that MCP has brought, and I think it's actually a really nice fit for GraphQL specifically.
All right.
So I kind of see building MCPs the same as like building a web application. You'll have your GraphQL server. You'll be building queries. If you're following best practice, you'll have persistent queries, persistent documents as well. You've kind of locked down what you want to show to your end user, which is a combination of queries. Could be, combination of mutations as well. But in the end game, like for example, say, I'll take for sales an example. If you want to build a project, you'll set up a project, you do a project call, you set up a call to add environment variables, you do a deployment, add a domain, everything. That's one call in your application, right? The user just wants you to create a project with everything in it. It doesn't want to know, like, hey, do all these in-between steps. And it's the same for I think, MCP servers as well. Like, hey, you've got your API, you've got your data source. You should create tooling for it that kind of combines like the best of GraphQL, like doing multiple queries or joining together data deeper in your, let's say, schema as well. And then you get more like intention-based tools rather than just capabilities, like outputting single queries as well.
Yeah, I think I want to take maybe a historical look at software development history perspective. And if you think about somebody invented the database first, and later on SQL comes along because someone had that desire of, I really want to have an expressive way of manipulating my data. And the same way in the web, like we had that REST kind of API first, and then we decided, right, we want something a lot more expressive that can do a lot more things, so then GraphQL. So eventually I feel like MCP will be a layer that offers a very fundamental thing, and then someone will need to create a more expressive language, whether it's GraphQL or not, on top of it, and be able to introduce that kind of more complex structure or graph, right? There are already, like, people are asking problems like, how do I manage my 1,000 MCP servers since they're all like flat, right? It's one-dimensional array of tools. How do I manage it? It's just like keep on growing. So how do I introduce that kind of relationship? I think GraphQL has a lot of like great properties that we have, like the schema that kind of represent that relationship. We have like introspection that allows like kind of discovery of for the LLM that really played super well along into these characteristics. But yeah, I definitely I see in the future there is something more expressive than what currently MCP offers today.
So what does GraphQL and the GraphQL tooling need for better AI experiences and better support? Thoughts on that? API tooling. Fredrik, I'm put you on the spot.
I mean, I hope I don't put other people on the spot by saying this, but I think if GraphQL is going to be the de facto orchestration layer for agents, then we're going to have to move really fast and adapt and listen. Like if you look at the MCP momentum, like like you said, November last year. Look at all the stuff. It wasn't great as expected with a new technology and a new spec, but they've gotten pretty good since the June spec, I would say, and it's progressing even faster. So how can we apply that to the GraphQL spec and add all the missing pieces to agents to be productive and efficient? That's going to be critical, I think. Like maybe a new spec every 3 months or something. I don't know. Again, like I don't want to offend everyone because there's a lot of good work being done in the foundation and everything, but I think we're going to have to see a drastic change in velocity and willing to be open to new ideas and make changes quickly. That's my take.
Kewei?
Yeah, I guess one of the challenges I want to brought up in terms of like just having LLMs like accessing your data is this like concern for security, and that's something our security engineers have been like thinking like super hard about, and they it's essentially I don't know how many people know this, but essentially in the security world there is this concept of rule of two. It's similar to the CAP theorem, but it's in the security where you essentially can only guarantee your application is safe if it fulfills 2 out of the 3. So one is you need to have a trusted input. So thinking about our prompts, can you trust all of the user inputs? Can you trust everybody is like not malicious? The second is you are not going to access data that's like private and sensitive. That one we also cannot guarantee because the definition of MCP is that it started accessing a lot, integrating with our applications and tools. So it has access to a lot of the private and sensitive data. And the third one is, can it not do mutations? If you don't do mutations, or if you're guaranteed that you're returning the data to the individuals that's reading it are trustworthy, then it's fine. But as we can see, like how we're with like agentic behaviors today, where essentially we need all 3. Then you cannot guarantee your application to be secure. So that's a kind of a dilemma that we're facing today. And funny enough, it's I think a lot of times like they're looking at how we at Meta like kind of baked a lot of the security decisions into GraphQL and kind of leveraging that. Like you already have an application built on top of GraphQL. You've solved some of that security problems with GraphQL. Can we reuse any of that solutions? Can we make sure it's kind of pulling in? So potentially an advantage.
Yeah, big plus one on the security side. I think one of the things that's happening with the velocity of the MCP protocol, dynamic client registration is a good example of one of the standards that has come up in how auth works in MCP. And I think the other side that's starting to collide with that, which is being baked right now, is the authorization part of that auth story, right? You have access to this tool, but that tool has access to n number of services. The token at the MCP server level is a resource token, not the authorization token. So how do you do this exchange, which traditionally everyone builds all that stuff into their GraphQL API, right? That's kind of one of the great things about GraphQL is you just add those things in there. I mean, Apollo, we have some directives you can put in your schema, and we trim the execution based off of the scopes and policies a person has. But that's the Apollo way to do it, right? And each way is kind of a little customized. I do think there's some standardization there. I think one of the big things we need as GraphQL is honestly more of the community in the space. Just straight up, more of the community in the space. I attended MCP Summit, the first one in SF, and I just saw the energy and was like, this feels like the mobile moment all over again. It's just the new application, right? And everyone is just doing everything with REST. And honestly, I'm looking at the code bases and I'm like, no way, I wouldn't want to manage any of this. And a lot of it just feels very much of what I was talking about 7 years ago when I first started Apollo with companies. I came from the .NET world where I was telling everyone, build portable class libraries and share your business logic. And then I saw GraphQL and was like, oh my gosh, I've been telling everyone the wrong things to do. And I think there's a lot of that repeat happening in the agentic MCP space. And nobody's even talking about GraphQL. And then, the few folks that are in the community starting to talk about it, everyone's like, oh yeah, now I think about it, GraphQL does seem like a really good fit for this. And so I think the more we talk about, the more we're present in that. It's very similar to what GraphQL and React had in the early days of just builders building together and helping us, each other, figure these things out. So I think, I took an action item after seeing Uri's keynote. I need to get into the community working group and figure out how do we start connecting more of the MCP community with the GraphQL community, and drawing those natural community bridges in there.
I've got one more short for short term mostly. We need more tooling to generate context. If you're building a specific operation for an MCP tool, then you should be able to tree shake just that operation, all of the types, input and output as well. You kind of want to minify it, but you don't want to get rid of any of the descriptions or any other important context as well. And at the same time, we also need to look examples how would you handle errors? How would you give more context to an LLM in the GraphQL spec as extra information when you get an error? The spec will most likely contain it, but we need more examples there as well and more tooling.
So you touched on context there, and that's a big thing with LLMs: context, token limits. So what's the secret? How do we handle context and token limits when we're exposing our API for LLMs? Anyone got the magic sauce? Go ahead, Boris.
I mean, it kind of open already. Hey, we need specific context for any of the operations that you do. There's a ton of ways that you can integrate GraphQL with an MCP server. You could go for, hey, I've got this specific operation. And I want to output it. It's quite easy to keep your context more compact. The MCP server that I wrote is just like a free form. You can add everything in. The first thing that happens is you add in your whole schema, you get context rod. There are multiple ways to go at this. I think a few strategies, of course, is hey, make sure that you're only giving the information that's needed for this call. At the same time, also look at how are you modeling your tool calls as well, and how are you modeling your schema. I think especially for tool calls, like I said already, make sure there's a few tool calls that do exactly what your users want your MCP server to do, and not a ton of intermediary steps. One thing that often happens is if people talk about context, they're talking about the initial context, hey, this is what I'm going to give it before I even start chatting to you. But every step in between is also context, and every step can at one point hallucinate. So if your user's action needs 5 steps, then somewhere in those 5 steps it could go wrong. it will most likely go wrong somewhere, and you'll get an issue posted on your repo. So.
Any other thoughts on Kewei? Go ahead.
I feel like this is very much like an open question for us that I hope like we together can work like super closely to figure it out. So it's a real problem, especially for how do you integrating an existing application into an LLM world where you already built out your application in the last, I don't know, 3-4 years. Your schema is already grown. It's very complicated. It's not an option to just dump it in a context window and then expect the LLM to be able to like query it. As you mentioned, like context rot is real. I think there are many solutions that proposed by the community. Introspection is one of the ones that's more popular, where you just like ask the LLM already knows how to write introspection queries, so just keeps on asking questions to the schema, and then like figure out how to write that queries so you avoid loading that. Tree shaking, as you mentioned, is another, like how do I like cut my schema so that I'm just giving the portion that's needed. Some of us were like thinking about like given a set of queries that you write a query and then you reverse generate that schema, which is exactly the minimum set that you need for the model. So a couple different interesting solutions in this space. I would say it's like super early at this point for us to say like which one works out, but super excited to have this conversation again a year from now. We'll give different answers.
For sure.
I'll chime in. So, in addition to all the strategies you just mentioned, I think one thing we've seen will work really well, especially when we're working with multiple MCP servers that have multiple tools. You know, there's this magic limit of I think 25 or something like that. But even around 15, 20, you know, you start seeing hallucinations. So, like this two-step strategy where you do a full text search index of all the tools from all the servers, and then you can then search essentially. It's like, hey, create a GitHub issue, then execute it. That scales really well, and you know you can have really large schemas, really large APIs because all the tools are not exposed at all time.
I think the question of how you protect the context window and like how you manage context tokens, I think also you kind of have to take the context of what application you're trying to build. I really see two worlds of like MCP development. And I'd put this just more of like tool development. You're going to have a world, what I like to call bring your own agent. And that's where a company that, you know, for example, makes a decision, we're going to use Claude. And so they sign up to get Claude licenses for everyone. So a lot of people in the company now use Claude Desktop. And there's going to be like internal MCP servers or tools that, you know, help agents internally for all that stuff. And then you also have the agent you're building for your customer, right, or your end users. And I think there's two different worlds in there. And the end user one, where it's for your customers, that's where I don't think introspection type stuff works out that great. It gets really, really challenging. I mean, I've done a lot of hackathons, and that's like...
It's like latency, right? Inefficient.
Yeah, inefficient. You know, it gets really chatty in the calls, and it's just not the experience you'd want for your end user. For like an internal use case, it's actually not that bad. It's pretty good. And we've done some stuff, you know, Minify is a good example. We have a couple tools that have broken up introspection a little bit more. We have a cool tool that allows you to take any type node, and it just returns that snippet from the schema. And then we also have a search tool that you can use different terms, and it just returns like that context. And in my development, I've actually found that when you start out by querying the root query or the root mutation, find the field that is associated most likely with that user, and then doing a search for the return type and the input types that aren't default scalars, you actually get a very accurate result. Because the one thing that LLMs are really good at is understanding GraphQL and building queries and doing stuff. It's just more of, I have a schema that like, you know, GitHub's public schema is already like 300,000 context tokens. And when I've talked with the internal team, they're like, our internal schema is like 10 times larger than that. So you can't just like give the whole schema. To give some ideas, it's about $1.30 if you were just going to give the context of the GitHub schema to an LLM to start asking questions. And then every time you ask another question, that's in the message history. So the API call just gets more expensive for each call afterwards, right? comparatively, if you did what I was talking about of looking at the root query down to that, I got it down to about 6 cents on using GPT 3.5 in that world. So you can even use cheaper models in kind of how you break that down. So those are some things I've done to start to figure out how to deal with like a large schema and get to the right like limit of context.
Can I, sorry, kind of went on a tangent when you mentioned about introspection. I think one of the things that LLM is really good at, or the structure of the prompt is going to be really efficient, is if you give it an example. And then like you tell it to do something. And so how this relates to introspection is we already kind of meta internally. Instead of introspecting your schema, how about you introspect all of your queries and mutations? So think about building a tool where it answers the question, find me all of the fragment definition that is spreads on this type. Find me all of the queries that use this fragment. And so that kind of is an actual very efficient way for the model to learn about your code base and how like your current engineers are writing those GraphQL queries and serve them as like good working examples that the LLM can follow. And so just want to call out that this is actually one of the advantages of GraphQL because we're so declarative, we're so transparent. So for the LLM to find an example that is actually working, it's a very unique advantage that I think other more opaque APIs wouldn't be able to do.
My talk actually at GraphQL Conf last year was talking about how to do that with operations in a RAG strategy in like vectors. Because I was same thing. I 100% agree. It's a great way to look at it.
So, sadly, we are actually at time. There's so much more we could talk about: hallucinations, generating APIs with AI. And so I hope this is just the start of a conversation. We can grab some drinks. We're going to be in Amsterdam for several days and keep the conversation going. Let's give a big round of applause. Thank you all so much.